Hello and welcome to the CSN3M Mindset Monday podcast. I'm Andrew Wade with Case Specific Nutrition. On this channel, we focus on the 3 M's: mindsets, myth busting, and mentoring, all as they pertain to health and nutrition. This podcast is brought to you by the OptiLife Academy, Case Specific Nutrition's very own online do-it-yourself wellness course. Be sure to check out the free trial at optilifeacademy.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. You can use code Andrew at checkout to receive 10% off in getting started with your healthy lifestyle mindset change. On today's episode, I'm going to be discussing tracking. And this comes a few weeks after we had our discussion on health measures, where we kind of looked at ways we can investigate health and self. We kind of debunked and thought through the scale, as well as body composition, as well as some of our more meaningful lab values. And I wanted to kind of add to that today, because I think if we think about this from a big picture perspective, we can really see that tracking is sort of the daily component that goes into our self-awareness, where things like the scale and body composition end up being more of the monthly, and then our lab values can be almost the semi-annual. But unfortunately, tracking is something that can also end up having a whole lot of negative consequences. Too often I see people tracking and it's a negative, it's something that's become obsessive, or it's something that's become frustrating, or it's contributing to their anger and frustration with their process. And we need to step back when that's happening and ask ourselves, what's the point, right? Why did we get into this in the first place? So whether you're trying to lose weight, or whether you're trying to lower your blood sugar, or whether you're trying to improve your cholesterol, whether you're trying to just eat healthier, or you're trying to work on having less bloating and improved digestion, or even if you're an athlete that's trying to have metrics, the entire point of tracking is to collect data. And we have to remember that, because what's the point of a giant pile of data if you don't actually use it for anything? Data is meant to help us gather intel that allows us to confirm whether something is having a positive effect on us or not. And from there, then we can make adjustments. And so, said another way, data is meant to be a learning opportunity. And the reason that I feel I need to say that is because over my years, I can't tell you how many people I've worked with. They come into my office for an initial consult, and they preface our consultation with, "I've had a 1,000-day streak of tracking on MyFitnessPal." And they say it in somewhat of a boastful manner, as if to suggest that that somehow means they've accomplished something, or they know something that other people don't. And to be honest, if you have tracked your food for 1,000 days, I hope you would actually know more. But more often than not, when I ask the question, what have you learned from that? I'm met with a blank stare and a bit of confusion, because unfortunately, a lot of people mistake tracking with action. Tracking is not the action. Tracking isn't the thing that gives you a sticker. Tracking isn't the thing that's meant to actually improve your health. Tracking is an initial tool, a short-term tool that is meant to allow us to see data, which allows us to identify areas of improvement. So for most of my clients, if I use, for example, tracking food, I'm not going to have them do it permanently. It's going to be for a short period of time so that we can see what they're eating, when they're eating, how they're spreading their food out. If they're a person who has symptoms that digestive issues or inflammation or flare-ups related to autoimmune disease, we're going to try and correlate and see if there's any symptom correlation with certain food types. Tracking is meant to be data. And if you find yourself just tracking for the sake of tracking, that's not in itself useful. There are many people that use tracking to try and count calories and keep track of it. But even that is something that really should only be short term, because at the end of the day, a good day isn't simply a day that's met your calorie goal. A good day is a day where the food tasted good, the food was satisfying physically and mentally, and then as in combination with that, it was sustainable. And so if you track initially, it might help you see some examples of days that feel really good, for example. And so it might have you, be able to identify, oh, wow, when I, do these types of meals, I tend to be more full, or it seems like, quinoa is more filling to me than when I use sweet potatoes. Little observations like that are meant to keep us in tune with ourselves. And so when you go into a tracking mode, think of it as Step one, think of it as a short-term step with the goal of learning as much as possible. If you've walked out of tracking and all you can say is that you've accomplished tracking, you kind of missed the point. And to be honest, that's the case with any type of tracking, not just tracking food, but if you're tracking water intake, but it doesn't actually lead you to change the behavior or the habit. If you're tracking your steps, the entire point of tracking your steps is to, at first, see how much you actually move, right? And from that, then start to identify. If you are tracking your steps and initially you find out that you're very sedentary for an 8-hour span during the day, that was the point of the tracking, was to expose that. And then we can spend the rest of our time, step two, actually taking action, actually looking into what you can do to make that time less sedentary. Or if you find when you're tracking food that there's a meal time that you find yourself getting really hungry leading up to, and it sets you up in many ways that you find yourself often eating really large meals, we can start to identify that as a schedule variance, and we can start to work on intervening on that actual issue, right? So we can work on, that's a meal that it sounds like if you wait to plan it, you end up just settling for cereal as an example. That's where we can say, okay, so let's take that information and recognize some preparation or some planning might be a really useful asset there. And then prioritizing, making sure there's a vegetable present, and making sure we have some protein available is going to reduce the, chances of us settling for some sort of snack instead of an actual satisfying meal, or settling for takeout instead of something from the grocery bill from that weekend prior. So keep in mind that tracking is step one, and really the entire point of it is to learn or identify. And from that, then we can start to try and use that knowledge, use those observations of struggles to try and start to put in action steps or interventions. The goal of tracking is never to make it obligated or obsessive. That is what I see too often, is that you get people that are, tracking their food every day and get anxious if they can't, or get frustrated if they're not able to eat, or they're not able to track a certain food, or if they struggle to track something because someone else made it, they find themselves getting anxious. Those are all really, really negative ramifications of something that's supposed to be a simple initial deep dive. And then I can't tell you how many people I've met where they're obsessed with their step count and they find themselves walking in circles around their living room at the end of the day just to appease a number, as opposed to recognizing the point of observing your steps is to eventually learn ways to be more active throughout the day. So just keep in mind that obligation and obsession when it comes to tracking is really not the goal of it. It's meant to be a step one initial observation that then inspires action. It's meant to be a learning phase. And, said another way, I like to think about it as, with this mindset, we are entering anything we are trying to do in terms of self-betterment and health and habit creation. The entire point of that is personal growth, right? We're always learning. We're not seeking to be experts. I'll be the first to say I'm 29 years old, and if I could sit here on this podcast and arrogantly claim that I knew all that I needed to know to get through life, that would be a shame, right? I have plenty of years that I need to continue learning and growing professionally and personally, and we all do. And so let's keep in mind that the entire purpose of tackling new habits or trying to improve personal health is really to grow, to improve, to learn. And with that, we're allowed to make adjustments. We're allowed to come at it smarter. We're allowed to come at it better, which is the hope of really any of the podcast episodes we create here, but is also the hope of inserting any sort of awareness into your life. And so don't be afraid to utilize tracking metrics, but make sure you're asking the right question. What is the purpose of this tracking? What am I going to gain from it? If it's just to do it, that's not really very useful. And then from there, one of the things that I would pitch and promote is, once you've used these metrics, the eventual goal is that we first basically collect data to observe what our struggles and what our obstacles are. And then we insert adjustments and changes and mindsets and behaviors that can adjust that over time. And you may work with a dietitian or a health coach in that way to identify some of the ways you can intervene. That's really what I think the dietitians at Case Specific do most often, We are the individuals that work with people to identify, okay, you're struggling with lunches, that meal you find yourself grazing or snacking or not eating, and it's leading to excessive hunger later in the day, which leads you to end up making choices that leave you feeling bloated and give you reflux. Let's work on trying to set up the dominoes so that they fall a little bit better. Right? Tracking leads to information. Information can inspire action. Action can adjust behaviors, which can really improve our health and our self in time. The eventual goal is that if we're going to track, we really should get away from the micromanaged tracking and really focus instead on the macro-managed, right? Because once again, let's take a step back. What's the point of tracking? Usually it's to improve health in some way, or it's to raise awareness of some metric you're trying to move, whether it be performance or health or some sort of professional improvement. And the thought there is that if you spend too much time in that minutia, in those minor details, you'll oftentimes forget why you're doing it in the first place, that's what happens when those people walk into my office having tracked 1,000 days. They probably started tracking because they were trying to get a better understanding of what they ate in the first place. And 1,000 days later, they completely forgot that the tracking wasn't what they were supposed to continue to do. They were really hoping to continue to work on better understanding what makes them full and what satisfies them and what energizes them and what bloats them and what makes them feel sluggish. Those were really the intended metrics. We weren't supposed to walk away with an obsession and addiction to our phone. One of the things I really like to do to help break out of the micromanaged habits is really try and focus on a big picture habit. And one of the ways I do this is with some clients, I'll have them do what's called a lifestyle 150. And the lifestyle 150 is 5 things that we want to do each day, or we aspire to do each day, that from our tracking, from our observations, from all of our learning, we've determined will help us improve ourself. So say your goal is general wellness. You might pick your 5 things being 30 minutes of intentional movement daily as one of them, drinking a certain amount of water daily, for example, eating meals and including some type of produce at every meal, whether it be a fruit or a vegetable. And then from there, it could be an awareness of types of snacks or timing of snacks, where it could be to say that, we seek to only eat snacks when actually physically hungry. And then a good 5th one that I like to throw in with people is to read 10 pages of a book or to learn something new each day. And what would those metrics do, right? Over the course of 30 days, that'd be 5 items times 30 days is 150, hence lifestyle 150. But the thought is that if you did that over the course of a month, your hydration would be consistent, which obviously has a lot of good benefit to mind and body. Your physical activity would be intentional and there'd be some sort of movement. But once again, the type of movement could vary from a walk with family members to doing yard work to doing some sort of formal exercise program. The focus on produce would allow us to further increase our fruit and vegetable intake, which has immense benefit in regulating appetite, in supplying and supplementing our digestive tract and feeding our good bacteria, which signal our hunger and fullness and help our hormones stay in tune. If we have an awareness of the types of snacks we're eating, that can basically have a sort of a big picture view on removing or reducing the amount of emotional and mindless eating we're doing, which can slow us down and have us eating with more intention and further bringing us closer to our personal awareness. And then having a completely separate non-nutrition and movement focus of, reading 10 pages would set it up so that over the course of a month, you'd read 300 pages, which means you would be reading about 12 books a year on average. And so when we think about what those habits do, they're not these obsessive micromanaged habits. They're more of a big picture focus. And what do? They symbolize feeling your best. They symbolize the bullet point list that has sort of addressed the things you've learned. I know for me, a common one I like to include is sleep, getting adequate amounts of sleep. And if there's a certain area that you personally struggle, that you've observed and worked with with an individual, the hope is that we can create a big picture bullet point that we can then keep track of. And what's neat is from here, then we can play the game majority rules, which is we're now saying that there's 5 check marks a day that symbolize your overall life balance, and that's 150 check marks in a month. Well, if we ended up with 120 of them, that would be an 80%, right? Which would be a majority. And as far as my recollection carries me, pretty much every professional sports team since the 1970s has had about an 80% win record to win their national championships, right? So we can still be extremely successful when we have our majority rules in play. And what's cool is we can see where this becomes positive. It doesn't have this, failure mindset associated with it. It's kind of a positive challenge that reminds you of the things that mean the most to you. And then you take a piece of graph paper, or if you're someone who's far more artistically inclined than me, another way that you can capture 5 check marks or 5 stickers or 5 whatever per day over the course of 30 days, and the goal is to get as many of them as you can, right? So read as much as you can, have the food and the awareness of food and activity and intake as positive as we can. And that puts us in a really, really good place to, at the end of the month, be able to look back and see what our intention was, and from that intention, see what we can do to further adjust and adapt. Again, the entire point of tracking is to raise awareness, and the entire point of awareness is to inspire positive action, not obsessive obligations, but instead simple awareness of self that allows you to move the needle over time, that needle being your health or your progress or your personal goals. I hope this has been a helpful thought for you today. I challenge you to outline your 5 main points of focus that will help you feel better about yourself and your health, and start your lifestyle 150. You don't have to wait for the first of the month. You can just start and do 30 days and then see where you're at and make adjustments and see if you can beat it the following month. I'd like to thank you again for listening. Please subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to share it on your favorite social media and tag a friend or a loved one. And don't forget to do your part in our cause by hashtagging Spread the Health in your post. For more case-specific nutrition content, you can follow us on all social media at Case Specific Nutrition. Check out our website, casespecificnutrition.com. We'll be back next week with another CSN3M Mindset Monday.